I think I can record as
All
well.
done.
Yeah,
Recording now.
Wonderful.
we're
Okay,
off. Okay, well, welcome
we're off.
everybody. It's a brilliant idea of you guys to set this meeting up, and UPR are very, very pleased to collaborate and tell you a bit about the journal and hopefully encourage more budding authors to publish with us. We
That's
can
the hope.
assure you we'll be really nice, and one of the things we pride ourselves on, and you can tell us if this is not your experience, is encouraging early career researchers to publish with us. And we do work hard to give them a positive experience to people and work with people. So if that's not your experience and you want to tell me about it, and you don't want to tell me about it on here, tell me about it via email. I'd be very happy to receive that feedback. The board takes issues really seriously. So I'm Kerry Curtis. I'm as Paul's christened me, the managing editor of the journal. I can't remember how long I've been with the journal. I think it might be about 15 years when I joined the ranks, and I think 10 years as managing editor. And I had to ask Anthony how long the journal had been going, because I'd forgotten, but it's 1982 it was set up. And it was always a journal that focused on, if you like, saying something useful about urban research to policymakers. So urban policy research, those three keywords really define our scope. And we're a journal that's primarily focused on Australasia. So we get classed as a regional journal in the international sphere. But when I say we're focused on that, we have actually got a wider geographic scope, but papers that come from beyond that, we do like them to talk to the issues that will be relevant to Australasia. I've got, now I'm looking on my screen, in order of appearance, Crystal Legacy from Melbourne University, who's the editor on the journal. I've got Mark Lim, who's Queensland. I've forgotten where, Mark.
I'm at QUT.
At QUT, who's we thought would speak second, so you can raise a lot of the issues about the ECR experience of publishing. And then Nicole Gurin, who is, what do we call ourselves now? Policy Practice Reviews. We've changed the name.
We're reviews and debates.
I knew I'd get it wrong. Welcome, Nicole. And then Paul McGinn, who is the editor-in-chief of the journal and is based at UWA over in the West with me. So I might get us to kick off. We thought we'd spend about 5 minutes each.
Before you start, Kerry, could I do just a quick housekeeping and introduction to ACERN?
Yes, please.
Great,
Sorry.
great. No, that's all right. I've got my plan here, so I want to get that out of the way. But hopefully, hopefully that was a really, really good introduction to the panel and urban policy and research for everybody. And also, as you can see, we're hoping this is a very casual sort of chat atmosphere. So please, please, please do put any questions that you have in the chat or participate in the discussion. It's meant to be a very casual sort of atmosphere. So that we can, bridge this divide between a scary journal and, everybody's questions and fears about publishing. But just really briefly, I'm Rebecca Clements. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Victorian chapter of ACERN, which is the Australasian Early Career Urban Research Network, which is always a slight mouthful. We're really, really pleased to be collaborating with Urban Policy and Research Journal on this event. And just to, I don't know, if anybody has to leave early, we are recording this, so we're going to be putting it up on our YouTube channel afterwards, which we've just started, and we're hoping to sort of build up a lot of resources there that early career researchers are able to access in the future to help with these sorts of issues. I also just want to do an acknowledgement of country. So in the spirit of reconciliation, ACERN acknowledges the traditional custodians of country and the diverse lands on which we're all meeting today throughout Australia and New Zealand and, oh, not New Zealand, sorry, and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today, acknowledging that Indigenous sovereignty has never been ceded. And I'm personally speaking from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And if anybody else would like to mention the lands upon which you're attending today, you can do so in the chat. So also just a brief introduction to ACERN, particularly for people who are new to the network. So we are a network of early career researchers, and we mean that in the broadest sort of sense, you know, including PhD students and anybody who considers themselves in the early career stage of their research career. And similarly, by urban, we really mean that in the broadest sort of sense. If you consider that you do some kind of urban research, then you know you're included. ACERN was established in late 2013 following the very first urban research PhD event, which was a 2-day State of Australian Cities PhD symposium, and probably many of us have been to the State of Australian Cities SOAC conference now. And since then, we've been building on that energy enthusiasm. We've now got probably 400 plus members, I'm not sure, like formal members. And then also we just have a lot of ECRs who interact with the network in more informal ways. We host a variety of state-based social, professional and academic events to just try and support ECRs to join forces, you know, network together, make connections, learn together. Yeah, and so in the spirit of that, hopefully this event today will, you know, be something that, again, as I said, will close that gap between journal and potential publishers. And please, 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 you know, use the opportunity to ask even things that you think might be silly questions. That's what this is here for. So I'll pass back now to Kerry to move along with the speakers.
Thanks very much for that, Rebecca. I didn't realise you had 400 members. That's impressive, and all the others. And
I'm a little out of touch with what the number might be right now, but
yeah, but that's impressive. That's really good. I've just noticed, I was scrolling through who was here, that Emma Baker is also here. She's a new person on the editorial board. So hi, Emma. Thanks very much for joining us. And if any other board members are here, maybe give me a wave or something. It's not very easy to scroll through all these screens. So I want to start by introducing you to Crystal Legacy. She keeps saying she's new to the journal, but she's not really. And Crystal's going to talk about a process issue in the sense of how you might convert a conference paper into a journal, and what's okay and what's not okay. And she's also going to pick up the process of publication from start to finish, which was a question that we had sent to us prior to this meeting. So over to you, Crystal.
Thanks, Kerry, and thanks again, Rebecca, Rewa, and ACERN for the invitation. I started my academic journey with ACERN many years ago now, and so I can't speak highly enough about that network. So if you're not already involved, please get in touch and become part of this pretty awesome community. So I'm an associate editor of UPR, and I'm going to talk a little bit about publishing conference papers. In thinking this through, I have a few ideas, a few thoughts that I thought I'd bring to the discussion. The basic sort of rule of thumb, I suppose, in terms of turning a conference paper into a journal publication is that 30% of that paper needs to be new content. That's generally the rule of thumb, but it is important to check with the journals you publish with and just make sure that that is the case for them as well. But when you do publish a conference paper, it's absolutely essential that you don't pretend it doesn't exist. So do cite that paper, that conference paper, usually as an acknowledgement at the end of your paper is usually appropriate. and certainly citations throughout when you're drawing on that material, that already published material. But certainly an acknowledgement is really essential. One of the things that I've learned through my time in academia is to use conferences very strategically and wisely, and use it as an opportunity to get feedback about that paper. So never let a conference opportunity go to waste. And what I mean by that is, even if the conference doesn't have a conference proceedings, and sometimes that does happen, there's lots of conferences around where that's the case, do still write the conference paper, because it's absolutely essential and important for your own sort of evolution of your thought. And to go to a conference with an actual paper always means that you've got something pretty substantial that you absolutely want to say. And so getting that feedback, receiving that feedback is really helpful as well in terms of translating that paper and turning that paper into a journal article. There might be other questions that will come in relation to that particular point, but I just want to fire through very quickly the other points that I've been asked to touch on, because I want to give ample time to everyone else and also to a Q&A. So one question that was raised was word limit. Journals, this journal, UPR, is pretty strict with word limit. For a research paper, it's 8,000 words, including references. So do be mindful of that. Always check that out before you submit to any journal. And that even includes when you respond to reviewers' comments. Typically, what is often the case, the reviewer will ask you to elaborate, but you still must adhere to the 8,000 word limit. Maybe perhaps Paul can touch on why that's necessary from a publication, from a commercial publisher perspective. But 8,000 words is the limit for UPR. In terms of the publishing process, well, as an editor of this journal, the experience that my understanding of the process is, well, you submit the journal, and then it usually is vetted by someone who will make sure that it aligns with the scope and aims of our journal. And if it doesn't, you may encounter what's called a desktop rejection. And don't be wary, I received those. I think we all have received those. But what that basically is telling you is that maybe this journal is not quite ready, your paper is not quite ready for that particular journal, and you may want to go somewhere else. And then once it is accepted for review, it will go out to at least 2 reviewers. Sometimes the review process can take a bit of time. Typically 3 to 4 months is kind of what we aim for. But given the current climate, sometimes it does go beyond that. And I currently have a paper being reviewed by another journal, and it's been sitting there for nearly 7 months. So that is common. Although from the perspective of the journal, we want to get them through as quickly as possible. And then we receive those reviews. Those reviews are typically read by someone like myself, the editor. And then I will write a letter to you asking you to provide a major revision, a minor revision, maybe perhaps even a reject, and offer you some guidance as to how you might undertake your revisions. Then you spend a bit of time, you reflect on those revisions, you resubmit, and then it goes through that process again. So from point of submission to publication, it can take a bit of time. I don't know what the typical length of time is for our journal, but it can take up to a year at times. So that's just something worthwhile and something to keep in mind. Okay, just quickly, because I don't want to spend too much time talking, I will say one last thing. The question was asked of me to consider what are the 3 things that I would suggest if you're going to submit a paper. The question was asked, if it's your first paper, what I think this is true if it's not your first paper, and this is advice that I myself take. One is to make sure that you read the aims and scope of the journal. It's absolutely important. You want to make sure you're sending it to the right journal. 2, you want to make sure you're sending it to a journal that's having the debate that you want to have, or that you want to contribute to with your paper. Make sure that the paper aligns with some of the current content. Maybe it takes a debate and extends it, and maybe that's the contribution you're making, but very clearly think through what is the contribution your paper is making, and how does it contribute to the debate that's being had in that journal. That's really useful advice. So that was given to me very early on. The last thing I'll say is absolutely find a critical friend. Find someone who could be a mentor, could be a peer, could be someone in your network outside of academia. but make sure that they're prepared to give you honest feedback. It's always good to send a paper to a friend, your critical friend, before you submit. All of us get too close to papers and we don't see the flaws with the paper, in the paper, before we submit. And what you don't want to do is make the reviewers do that work for you. You should try to submit the best paper possible. And in order for you to be sure that that's the case, speaking to and sharing it with a critical friend is really important. So I'm going to stop there and pass it on to, I guess, back to Carrie. Okay, we can't hear you, Kate. So Carrie, so maybe we'll pass it off to Dr. Lim. Next in the agenda.
Thanks, Crystal. And thank you to Akern for hosting this event and also for inviting me along. I'm absolutely honoured to appear amongst such esteemed company here today. I'd also like to, I come from, I'm in a different place here in Queensland, so I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of where I'm sitting right now, who are the Turrbal and Yagara people, and to pay respects to their elders. So I was asked to sort of give the early career researcher experience, I suppose, of what it's like to do some publishing. And this is, you know, I'm new to this myself, so this is very much my experience. I certainly don't intend to speak for everybody. So I thought I'd just sort of run through what I did with my PhD, which is sort of, I guess, where a lot of papers typically originate for early career researchers, and how I sort of felt going through that process. And I thought I would share that with you to see if there's hopefully some insights for you in there. So yeah, basically I didn't publish as I went along with my thesis. Maybe not the wisest move, but it sort of like kind of worked out. I did manage to sort of luck into a job, thankfully. But I sort of held it off to the end. And so basically I've got this big thesis that I then need to convert into a series of papers. And it's sort of a tricky thing to do because, you know, as you get towards the end of your thesis, it's kind of exhausted. You're sort of exhausted with the physical effort of doing it, as well as just probably somewhat exhausted by the topic, even though it's obviously an interesting topic, but you're probably starting to get a little bit over it. Then you've got to convert it into papers. So it's sort of managing that exhaustion a little bit, and also learning to sort of let go of key things. You'll find yourself sort of incredibly, well, I certainly found myself being incredibly connected to the data and analysis that I had done, to the point that I'm just packed full of details. But it's actually quite a lot of work to then sort of convert those into a succinct series of papers that adequately communicate what's really interesting to hopefully a wider audience. So it's not an easy thing to do at the very end, but you know, you do it. This is an important part of doing academic work, is being able to share what you're doing. So you go ahead and do it. And basically I prepared sort of 3 different papers. I sort of would write one out of my thesis, submit it, while I'm waiting for that one, work on the next one, submit that, and then the final one and submit that. And they were all kind of linked. They kind of told a story from paper 1 through to paper 3. And there's a bit of a cautionary tale with that, which I'll sort of get to. So I sort of started to submit these things. You get the acceptance letters back, hopefully, and that sort of sounds really good when you're new to this game. For me, it was like, yes, accepted. That sounds great, as in it's been accepted for review. So you're all quite excited with that, or I was certainly excited with that. And then the reviewers' comments start to come back in, and the excitement sort of wanes a little bit depending on how that goes. So for the first paper that I had prepared, it went to a particular journal, got accepted there. I had just received confirmation that my PhD had sort of passed its final examination. So I was actually celebrating with my family. We're having dinner, and you know, like ding dong on the phone. And I kind of pulled my phone out and had a look on my phone, and I was like, "Oh, it's from the journal. What's this?" And it was a rejection. And I remember my wife was like looking like, she sort of just saw my face drop, obviously, and was like, "What's the matter?" And I was like, "It's failed. It's been rejected at this journal." Like, because I did this in a fairly quick succession, I had the other journal I submitted to I had sort of this mixed thing. One reviewer was like, yep, straight through, and the other one wanted major changes. And the paper I submitted to UPR had relatively minor changes to it, thankfully. So in actual fact, the way the order of how this all ended up going was the punchline, which was the paper I delivered to, I sort of chose UPR because of its Australian focus and its connection to policy. And so I did save the best paper for UPR, I thought, and it kind of got published first, but it actually relied on all these other papers to make its point. I kind of needed those other papers to make the point for UPR. So then there was this weird thing of all the different papers being out of order, but eventually it kind of synced up. Those reviewer comments, because really that's when it's sort of harsh, because you get these things. No one likes rejection, no one likes sort of criticism, and it's anonymous and you don't know who it is, and some people aren't sort of, they're quite terse in their writing, so you can take offense, I suppose. And I guess it's something that I just had to deal with and rise above, I suppose, because ultimately what I did find is that you get the initial reviews and it's sort of, it's a bit of a slap across the face when you first get them. But I did find that pretty much all of them were actually really valuable. And when I sort of had time to sort of get over the initial emotional impact of it and pull back and reflect on what was actually said, I found it actually did make a big difference to the quality of the final paper. So I think probably the best way to look at those things would be one of trying to take the constructive aspects of those comments, and think of it as trying to improve your work. And often that's a case of how you're communicating your work more than anything. Like I said earlier, I found myself very deeply connected to all the content of my PhD, but that's not necessarily what's of interest to others. So it was quite handy to sort of see how other people are interpreting what has actually been written, because when you're very close to it, it's often difficult to see that, which I think is, like Crystal was saying there, having that critical friend to be able to help also do that for you, I think it's absolutely invaluable. And I probably left it a bit to my co-authors, but also I probably left it too much to the reviewers. What else was I going to say here? I had a few other points. The other thing I was really fortunate to do, and that was to sort of work as a co-editor for a special edition of the journal, and that was an amazing thing to do. And one of my supervisors invited me to do that, and it was really, really handy because it gave me this insight. It's a whole process that was completely unusual to me, and I could sort of see what it's like to sort of take in these various papers and give them an initial review, see how it fits together, find the commonalities, find how you can kind of link this together into a cohesive sort of form. It was a really interesting process to do it. It was good to make the sort of connections that are associated with that. So it's something I would encourage people to do, I think, if you get the opportunity, or to maybe even seek it out. If you can see there's special editions being proposed, maybe you could ask people if you can be involved as well. There's often a lot of legwork involved when doing that, which you could help out with. So yeah, that was pretty much my experience. I hope that sort of covered the general gist of what you guys wanted, Rawa, Rebecca, and Declan. But yeah, I'm happy to sort of go on, answer questions or elaborate further as needed.
That was great, and I think we're getting comments in the chat saying how relatable that was.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That was really good. I thought I might just share with you how I feel every time I get a review, and I've published too many papers to think about, but every time it's a real downer. I have to read it and then put it away for a few days and usually go and get a stiff drink. And you're so spot on that when you go back and reread it, you go, oh, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And actually I've had two papers that I think reviewers completely rescued me. They saw what I wasn't seeing in the paper. This issue about being too close is so true. And one of them, I changed the title of the paper to really reflect the core contribution of that paper. So as much as we bag reviewers and go on about them, when we've kind of gotten over the first reading, they are really helpful. And I would just say on a process point of view that the journal has the opportunity to rescind a review. We don't, we're very careful about what reviews go out. So if something's defamatory or below the belt or really unhelpful or just so scant, it's not offering anyone any advice, then we rescind that and invite another review. We also go beyond to reviews if we've got such a divergent point of view, like perhaps one, this is a great paper, this is a reject. And as a journal, as editors, we expect the reviewers to give us, the journal, the advice. And then I think the other reviewer that's always in the background clearly is the editor who has carriage of your paper, and sometimes the board as a whole. So even if all the reviews say it's great, the journal has a particular scope, particular way it wants to reach, and it might add an extra bit of advice that it would like the author to take on. So sometimes people go, well, I've done everything the reviewers say, why are you asking me to do something else? That's the journal taking ownership of the content of its paper. I wanted to pick up on Crystal's 8,000 words. There are several reasons for the 8,000 words. Some of it's, if you like, the contract, the mechanics, that we have a page limit per annum. And so we decided on 8,000 words plus references, which is horrendous for some people. It's horrendous for all of us to try, as academics, to try and be tight. But people come to us and say, oh, come on, you know, can I just have another 1,000 words? And we say, well, no, that's unfair, because that's another author that's not getting a voice in the journal if you go above that. So it's a contractual thing. Even though our papers go out online, we're still bound by that per annum page limit. So thanks very much, you two. Let's go over to Nicole now. And I hope I haven't stole your thunder, Nicole.
No, we could talk about how to deal with the bad peer review forever. And believe it or not, there's actually a literature on it. I did my homework as a good scholar, and I've come up with this paper. I'm going to read the title to you. It's called "This Work is Antithetical to the Spirit of Research." And it's an anatomy of harsh peer reviews. So one of the difficult things about getting a bad peer review is we very rarely get to see other people's peer reviews. So in fact, this paper makes the point that one of the worst things for new researchers about getting a bad peer review, in fact, all peer reviews are critical, as I'll delve into in a moment. But when we don't see other people's, it can be really discouraging for new career academics, and actually quite a few go on to not resubmit their paper, which, if you take nothing else away from what I'm going to say, it's if you get a major revision, revise and resubmit that paper to the journal. So, okay, so all reviews are critical unless they're written by your mother or someone who can't be bothered. So move on. If it's a reject, as Crystal said, you want to work out two things. You want to know if it's a reject because it doesn't fit the scope of the journal, in which case look for another journal, move on. The other reason is if the editor and the reviewers don't see the research contribution in your paper. And that is either because your paper is premature, in which case you've got a lot to work with. So it doesn't go in the bin, but it just, you need to do some more work on it, or it's because you haven't articulated that contribution clearly enough. Again, doesn't go in the bin, you can work on that. So that kind of a swift reject is often easier to deal with, actually, than if you get to that decision, some way down the reviewing process. Put that away. Then I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty to what you do with a major revision, which is the most likely outcome for most papers, I think. So you get a major revision, it's a bit bracing. What do? Jump onto Twitter. It's called "Shit My Reviewers Say" @ThisPaperSucks. All right. And to give you a flavour of the sorts of things that you might read there that other people have experienced. Reviewer 1, Reviewer 2, take your pick, says there are two possibilities. This paper is part of an experiment to try and determine how badly a research paper can be and still be accepted. Or the authors are actual fools and it would be in the editor's best interest to ban them from submitting to the journal in the future. Or another review could be, the only conceivable contribution this paper can make is by providing the academic community with an alternative to counting sheep. Okay, you get the idea. Just go spend some time there. It's really fun. You can go there even if you don't have a bad review, obviously. If I'm having a bad day, that's where you'll find me. So after you've been there, after you've had your drink or whatever it is you need to do, as Kerry says, take a week or so and then get into your revisions. Now, everyone's got their own best way of doing revisions, but what I like to do is actually I write a table and I pre-populate that table. On the side on the left, on my left, is the reviewer's comments. Reviewer 1, all of their comments. Reviewer 2, all their comments. If I've got 3 reviewers, lucky me, all of their comments as well. On the right-hand side, I pre-populate and I say how. I write it as though I've written the response and I say exactly how I'm going to respond to each of those comments. At this point, if you haven't already identified inconsistencies between the reviewers, you'll be faced with the possibility that reviewer 1 might be suggesting you go this direction, reviewer 2 is suggesting you go in that direction. This is your point at which you decide which review you're going to prioritise in terms of resolving those things. If you're taking reviewer 1's advice, that's probably going to mean that whatever concerns reviewer 2 had, they're going to be resolved, even if it wasn't the way that reviewer 2 imagined, and you can explain that in your argument. You'll also find as you're methodically going through each of the reviewer's comments that some comments you're just not able to address because they don't make sense or they've missed something. This is your opportunity to write that in there as well. Then actually go and do the reviews, and as you the revisions, and as you do the revision, your revisions, you go back to your table, give a page reference if you can. Absolutely be doing those revisions in track changes so that the editors and the reviewers will be able to see what you've done. But of course, make sure that you've actually done the things that you said you were going to do. So you've got that table. It's a complete table. Be very polite and concise but informative in that table in your response to each of those reviews. And remember, if you've got a lengthy peer review, that's generally a very generous act on behalf of the reviewer, unless they're being gratuitous, and let me say something about that later. Most reviewers who actually spend their time to write something extensive, they're either early career or very late career, and they are really setting it all out there because they want to make it easy for you in revising to address their concerns. So it's actually quite generous, even though it can seem like a lot to handle. So be polite in responding to them. Don't be groveling, obviously, but absolutely you don't want to dismiss them. You're not reviewing their review. You're not trying to make that reviewer look silly, because that's going to irritate them, and they'll be less likely to actually see the merit in your revisions. Now, if they suggest references, the editor should be running interference if they get the sense that the reviewer is suggesting a whole back catalogue of their own work that they want to see you citing, and they should be letting you know that the references are suggested only. Otherwise, I think you can take the references on face value, and it's actually really generous for a reviewer to identify some relevant sources for you to look at. So have a look at them and incorporate them if they're relevant. At the end of it, do a very short, polite note to the editor summarising your response to the review, and then make sure you resubmit according to the journal's requirements. For us at UPR, it will be a table of revisions. Other journals may have a slightly different requirement, but I still find that table is very helpful. I usually find it's very helpful to submit a manuscript with track changes as well as a clean manuscript. And if you manage to sort of nail the electronic submission process, your clean manuscript will be up the front with the revisions, and your track change version will be somewhere down the bottom. But don't lose sleep over that. It should ultimately come as a package for the peer reviewers, again, to see exactly what you did. Now, the only other thing I wanted to say was that if you do get a sense that the review is aggressive or personal or unfair, you can send a polite note to the editors. And in fact, you probably should. Hopefully they will have picked up on that, but perhaps they didn't. You can certainly do that, but I would advise showing it to your friend. Oh, sorry, not to your friend, to a senior colleague. You can complain about it to your friend, complain about it all to your friend and to your mum and whatever, but run it by a senior colleague before you send a complaining letter to the editor, just to make sure that you haven't taken it personally, because we all take this stuff personally. But as I said, it's very, very common to receive a really detailed review. In fact, the longest review I ever received was longer than the manuscript itself. And it was so angry. The reviewer hated everything. They hated my subject, they hated my framing, but they also hated my syntax. And it was such a piece of art. I did take it into my lab and I said, listen, we have to look at this. This is an artifact. I've never seen anything like it. The reviewer might even need, you know, a diagnosis of some kind. But I didn't write a nasty letter back to the editor because it wasn't personal. They hated my submission, but they didn't hate me. And actually, it niggled the most because they were right. And they'd, you know, taken the time to be right, you know, over 30 pages. That ended up being one of my most cited papers. I'm not candid enough to tell you which paper it was, but there you go. That's the end of my story.
Always enjoyable listening to you, Nicole. Great story there. And I must put a few things on this Reviewer 2 website. One of the things I shall never forget is a would-be author who wrote back in the response to the reviews that the author had, would-be author. Who are these reviewers? They must be completely stupid. I had to go and open up and have a look for myself and see who they were. I thought, oh, well, actually, they're really esteemed people that I have a lot of respect for. Let me go and see what they said again, because bear in mind, as editors, we do read the reviews. We don't just send them out to you and throw you to the lions. I was just gobsmacked. It's not a good move to do that. We are a small community, even internationally, and you will get a reputation. So I think being polite but assertive is good. Okay, Paul, thanks for waiting so patiently. So your task was to talk about the state of the publishing industry more broadly, and to pick up the question about the theoretical contribution versus the practical data analysis question. Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Just to follow up on, I suppose, some of the comments from Crystal and also Nicole's there. So here are two letters. One's a rejection letter and one's an acceptance letter for the same paper. One went to the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research, and this is back, I got the reply back on the 1st of April 2004, so April Fool's Day, from Roger Kyle when he was the editor, saying, thanks, but your paper is shit. And now I've done work with Roger, and he's a very good friend of mine. So, and then the same paper went to a methods journal, actually an anthropology methods journal, because the paper was about negotiating access and doing ethnographic research. Went to 4 reviewers, two scoffed at it, 2 said it was really good. the editor made the call and accepted it, and then after some revisions, this caused the revisions, and this got it, the reviews here got it revised again and accepted. And then similarly, here's another one from 12th of January 2004, paper to Urban Studies, with Ronan Pattison as the editor, and it was again thanks but no thanks. Realized it was the wrong journal because again it was a methods paper. This is when I was in my qualitative methods era. Sent it to qualitative research and it got accepted, and this is now my highest cited paper. So some lessons there in terms of what Crystal and Kerry are saying. You just basically take a bit of space and move on and just deal with it. And quite often the reviews comments are, are actually very useful in the main. So in terms of, I suppose, publishing industry and sort of what's going on, I've written down a number of terms here. So things like impact factor, open access, altmetrics, reviewing processes, academic publication versus non-academic publications, and things like the geography of your research. So there's a bundle of things here. I'm going to take them. I'll take number of papers first as an issue. So structurally, what we're seeing is an increase in the volume of the number of papers being submitted to academic journals globally. At the same time, there's also an expansion in the number of academic journals, as well as, some journals are very specialist and others are try to be generalist. And that ties in with the whole issue of kind of open access. So from your perspective, there's a dilemma around choice, I think, basically, okay, in terms of where you might submit a paper to. And that can be, on the one hand, a good thing, but also it can be quite confusing, okay? Related to that, I think what we're also seeing is there's a contraction in the reviewer pool, okay? So we are seeing a kind of an extension of kind of reviewing times across different journals, basically, because the reviewer pools are kind of getting smaller. And on top of that, there's reviewer fatigue, because a lot of people are doing, because of the increase in the volume of papers, more people are reviewing papers, or a smaller group of people are reviewing more papers, and then they get to a limit and decide, no, I'm not going to kind of review anymore. And then a journal will cast the net far and wide to try and find suitable reviewers. And of course, that comes back to the issue of, I think Crystal mentioned this earlier, I suppose, the scope or the focus of your paper, basically, and how that ties in with, if your paper is very specialist and very niche, then it's going to be difficult, to find a reviewer to kind of, to review your paper, basically. If it's, particularly if it's kind of got maybe a very narrow geographical focus or a very narrow methodological or theoretical perspective as well, basically. So there might be challenges in trying to find reviewers in that sense, given all those other things going on with shrinking reviewer pool and reviewer fatigue. But I think in terms of the kind of the geography of your research and what this means for your choice in terms of where to submit, quite often big international journals will look at a paper which talks about Australia, if it talks about just a particular city or even a couple of cities, and it might be seen as somewhat parochial, okay, because it's like, oh, well, it's only Australia. Doesn't really, what implications or what lessons is there for, global urban studies or urban planning, basically. So you need to kind of think about that in terms of your decision making and where you're going to submit your journal to when it comes to that point. So if you've got a paper on which is looking at Perth or maybe a regional, a set of regional towns in Australia, then my suggestion would be is that you would look for an Australian audience, basically an Australian outlet, because you're actually going to get quite a lot of traction on there, I think, in terms of citations. There's going to be a reviewer pool that's kind of going to know your topic and so forth like this as well. If your paper is comparative in some way, well, then by all means send it to an look to an international journal on things as well. Just jumping around quickly, so the issue of open access is kind of suppose it's been a perennial issue for the last few years. We've had, I think, one open access journal paper, in the last couple of years. The issue with open access, of course, is you have to pay the publisher, not the journal, not us, not Nicole, not Kerry, not Crystal, not Emma, not Liz, not Anthony, not Jeff, not me. You don't pay us for the privilege of having open access. You pay the publisher for this. And from the publisher's perspective, they're forever looking at creative ways to maximize revenue and profits, and open access is certainly one of those methods, basically. And all the reviewers here have actually been involved, I think, in something really interesting in terms of some people might call it double dipping, I suppose, in a way, but I'm looking at this from the publisher's perspective. So we had a special issue on disruptive urbanism in urban policy and research about 2 years ago now. I think it's gone for its 2-year anniversary. And the publisher decided to republish it as a book, as an edited collection. So I don't know what it means for us in terms of impacts and metrics, whether it's 2 separate publications, whether the metric monitors in our universities will see that as a good thing, or they'll think that we're double dipping. But that's what they've done. Publishers are also, with book chapters and edited books, they're selling individual chapters instead of whole books as well, which is an interesting move. And if you've ever kind of looked at the pricing of a journal article, an individual journal article, an academic book, or an academic chapter, they're quite exorbitant. We don't get out there into the wider public in terms of our research in the scholarly sense of it, which leads me to my next point about, I suppose, academic publication versus, I suppose, non-academic publication. I'm really thinking here about the conversation as a really good way of getting your research out, or it's a really good way of starting to maybe test some of your ideas before you write the academic paper. So I've had 2 pieces out recently, just as an example, which are looking at COVID and retailing. And I'm using those as a strategy for other research. Basically, this is a way for me to get my ideas and thoughts, out in the public in a way, and start thinking about things. But also, those type of publications have more appeal to policymakers rather than scholarly articles. Okay, they're more digestible, they're easier to understand, they're quicker to read. And I'm using those conversation pieces basically as part of an emerging research strategy for a grant application that I hope to put in next year, which will involve industry partners basically. So be creative and be lateral, I think, in your writing and publication strategy. Crystal mentioned conference papers as a way of doing that, or conference presentations. When I started out in academia, conference papers that's where you kind of floated your ideas and then got the verbal criticism from people, then went away, wrote the paper, and then submitted it. Now we tend to write the paper and throw it into the conference rather than having that kind of digestion period going on elsewhere. And I'm just thinking here, alt metrics are important. So this ties into, we're all being monitored, surveyed by our academic institutions, because these things are important in terms of things like promotion or applying for jobs. Don't be afraid to promote your work, whether, whatever avenue it is. So coming back to Nicole's comment about Twitter and stuff, or other social media, if you blog, and I know some people here do, you should be using those outlets, I think, to get your publications out far and wide, and your ideas and the engagement with wider audiences. So I'm going to stop there.
Great, perfect timing, Paul. Thanks very much. There's been a really rich range of contributions from people. I just wanted to mention the International Advisory Board because it would be remiss of me not to. So if you go to, I'll put this link up. If you go to the journal, you'll see that we have a large international advisory board. For the journal as a whole, we select people who are on the editorial board, the core group in Australia, and on the IAB by geography, by we want a good gender mix, by different research focus, by different methodological focus, and that's to help us, get the best advice possible and to help you in being able to provide what we consider a top quality reviewers. I had the page open and noticed that Harsho Pan is down as University of Melbourne. I don't think he'd appreciate that. He's in Tongji in China, but we'll get that changed. Not so long ago, we renewed the IAB to get that wider focus. And I want to talk about the regional focus just quickly. I think anybody that publishes Australian cases, wherever you publish beyond UPR, gets bashed. Oh, who wants to know about Austria, the Americans say. But we've turned that on our head. So we do have a wider focus than just Australia and New Zealand. We hit the Pacific Rim on the west coast of America. We have Southeast Asia in our geographic scope. But all of them, we're always asking, well, it needs to be relevant for Australia and New Zealand. So two can play at that game. So if somebody's publishing from elsewhere or somebody seeks to publish with us from elsewhere and it's only, I don't know, about Toronto, let's say, we'll say, well, come on, why would Australians and New Zealanders need to know about Toronto? What are your lessons for us? So we're asking people to engage with the urban policy issues for us. I want to cut it now. We've got questions and we're running out of time. So, and Rebecca's put something up. Let's try and deal with questions. Are you going to manage that, Rebecca? Or...
Yeah, I might need some help if I
Sure.
don't notice people with their hands up immediately, since I've got 3 screens to sort of navigate.
I've got your
but
back.
otherwise, particularly for those people who don't have their video on, please feel free to indicate in the chat, and I'll just flag anybody. So I can at least see a question from Nathan to Crystal. You mentioned that to convert a conference paper for publication in UPR, there needs to be a 30% change or contribution. Could you elaborate on what shape or form this 30% should take?
Thanks, Nathan, for the question. I may actually lean a little bit on Carrie, Nicole, and Paul for this one. But I reckon typically a conference paper is about 5,000 words, and then a UPR paper will be about 8,000 words. So there's going to be more content there. I think it's probably really important to rewrite the paper, like use different words, revise it to that extent. So if someone were to do a Google cut and paste job, they won't see the exact same phrasing in this new paper as you used in your conference paper. So I think that's a really good rule of thumb, but I am going to lean on Carrie, Nicole, and Paul for this one because I think it's a tricky question. I'm not sure I have the full answer for you.
Okay, I might lead. One of the issues is if it's a conference paper that's been published in proceedings, it counts for something. So the paper does need to be different. The problem with conference papers published in proceedings is they disappear into the ether in time. And so it's better to resist that publication method, present the paper, but then go on and try and get the paper published in a peer-reviewed journal. If they're like for like, they're identical, we will get reviewers saying, hey, I've already reviewed this for this conference. This is 2 bites at the cherry. It's completely inappropriate. There's also issues of copyright. Some of the conference papers in proceedings are copyrighted there, and then you get yourself into trouble, and the journal will get a rap on the knuckles. As well as the fact that conference papers are usually short. They're not particularly closely peer-reviewed like a journal paper. But the paper probably will change as you take on board the reviewers' comments as well. So it's likely to be 30% different. And hopefully, if you've presented the paper at a conference, you've got one or two really great bits of feedback from either the audience or later over a coffee with a person who really engaged with your work that will inspire you to focus or reframe the paper a little. Does that answer that question, Nathan? Thank you. Okay, shall we move it on?
We just had a slight follow-up question that maybe we've covered, but does this apply differently for published versus non-published conference papers?
In a short answer, no.
All right, there we go, short answer.
Can I
yes.
ask a question? Okay, so my question is somewhat related, but thinking about the thesis and thinking back to what Dr. Lim was talking about, publishing after the thesis, if you are converting content from your thesis into publications, how different is that? Of course it is, but from the conference to journal, but how is the thesis to journal transition different than conference to journal?
Wow. So this is a thesis that isn't by publication. This is a standard monograph. And now how do I get my journal papers from this? Or alternatively, a book. Some people take the thesis and move on to a book and perhaps overcome some of the pain that Mark told us all about. Certainly that's very common in Europe. Sorry, somebody's trying to speak. Is it you, Paul?
Yeah, I was going to say, because so I've done both basically. So I converted my PhD thesis into a book, and then those two papers that I held up earlier were journal papers that followed out of that then as well, basically. And they were, they went through a process of kind of more reflection and engagement with the literature and thinking through about some of the more, I suppose, practical and policy implications of things, which weren't in the PhD thesis. I had a very good supervisor who basically coached me in writing the thesis to try and write it as if it was a book, not a thesis per se, which, because an academic thesis, full PhD thesis, they can be very kind of, I suppose, very dry by their very nature. But he encouraged me to kind of be a bit more kind of creative and lateral on things as well. And by the time I come out of the process and, I've kind of landed in this space about there's not a lot of work on qualitative research and methods in urban studies and its potential and application for policy. That's where those kind of two papers kind of emerged from, in a sense. So one was very policy oriented and one was very methodological oriented, because there wasn't, I couldn't see any literature kind of reflecting on those things. So I was able to eke out more energy out of the thesis basically by doing that.
Does anybody else want to contribute to that?
I might chip in if I may.
I hoped you would. I was going to ask you if you didn't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's really interesting advice from Paul there about having it written in a sort of in more of a book form, because I didn't have that. I did a very traditional monograph, I suppose, and it was then I actually found it quite difficult to detach the various concepts into discrete papers. So I sort of had this huge methods section that sort of detailed what's coming, like the methods for all of the things that are coming next, and then the results for each of the sort of key things. So there was these key themes, like sort of 3 key themes, which sort of lent themselves into individual concepts for papers. But it's all kind of like, yeah, the methods is in the methods section, the results are here, and then the discussion sort of, it's all sort of mixed in throughout the thesis in a way that didn't lend itself to easily being disentangled to be to be put into journal papers. And I sort of wish I'd put some more thought into what was going to happen with that in the process of when I was doing it to save myself maybe some of the complications I had later, because I was just purely thinking of just get the thesis done. That was my sort of primary focus throughout my PhD, basically. And yeah, I think in hindsight, I would have had a much I would have given much more attention to how this was going to work in the form of publications.
Okay, does that answer everything, Rewa? Or
it does, and I think it's so well timed. Crystal is one of my supervisors. She knows I'm like trying to figure out how are things coming together with my thesis. So it's great to hear how like thinking about it at the start, at the beginning, can maybe eventually help me, and I can not stop panicking. I have stopped panicking, but panic a little less about publications and focus on my thesis in a healthier way.
one thing that I recommend is to look at some of the literature review journals. So you spend a lot of time gathering together all the literature, the knowledge base about your topic, and you can save other authors an awful lot of time if you then go ahead and publish that. So it's a good lesson in being systematic, in synthesizing, and also setting it in the current context. What are the issues? What do we need to know about? And it really boosts your citation rate. So we did one on urban public transport in transport reviews. So there are journals like in my field, transport reviews, that are all about lit review papers. And there's nothing to stop you moving into that space. Well, I don't want to tread on Crystal's toes, but before you've finished. Okay, are there other questions?
I actually had a question, kind of going back into, I suppose, the state of the publishing industry and the future and whatnot. I was curious about, from UPR's perspective, what changes, if any, you had sort of experienced in the wake of COVID. I mean, as an example, we've probably all heard about how, smaller proportions of women have been putting forth journals, to be published, etc. I don't know if you guys have noticed any particular trends or had to deal with anything.
Okay. Paul, you might have a better overview on this, as across all of the papers. I'm not seeing a big difference at the moment. I think my big difference is in reviewers, getting reviewers, because I think everybody's overwhelmed being online teaching and doing all the meetings on teaching. So that has slowed down a little. People are writing an awful lot more as well now they're at home. So, but Paul, you might want to comment.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I don't, off the top of my head, I haven't seen anything noticeable per se. Rebecca and everyone. I think. I mean, there have been over, I think, since COVID started, there's something like 30,000 plus peer-reviewed papers have been written on COVID. And that was a figure I heard about probably 3 months ago. So an insane amount of work has been produced around it, as people were pumping stuff out and so forth. I think, interestingly, I think we didn't get any papers that really focused on COVID per se, although there is something bubbling in the background, looking at kind of COVID issues that might be coming over the horizon soon. But we didn't get a rush of papers on that particular topic. So I haven't seen anything noticeable. So I'd agree with Kerry.
Okay, Paul, Laura has put a question that you might be best placed to start with, because it's about writing their PhD thesis now, how to write it in a way that can make the process of creating journal articles easier. It sounds like, I don't know whether when that question came up relative to what you talked about with your thesis. There's Laura.
So I'm just reading it here.
Yeah. Is that covered, Laura, with what Paul already said, or?
Okay, yeah, said
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, great. Anything else? Because I need to be moving along fairly soon. Oh, how do special issues happen? Oh, okay. I like special issues.
Sorry, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, just related to the question that Rebecca posed around trends that we might be seeing. I think one of the trends that we might be seeing is how difficult it is to get a reviewer to review in a timely fashion. So just as a sort of a contribution, I think one of the things that we need to remember is that reviewing is part of building a community of practice in academia. And it's something that it requires a lot of labor. It's not paid necessarily, but it's absolutely integral to the work and the critical review process, and to lifting up our profession and our discipline within the profession, urban planning, to the highest of standards. And we all need to play a part in that. So I know we're all overwhelmed with work, but when you do receive an invitation from someone like myself asking you to review, do consider it and see it as part of an opportunity for you to see another paper and another way in which a paper could look strong or poor, and to think through, well, what makes this paper work or not work.
And just to add to that, I can attest to, although it is, like a lot of work, it is really, really helpful work. Like when I started doing reviews, it gave me a chance to sort of be on the other side and learn a lot from looking at somebody else's work and how they were presenting it. And particularly because you're probably going to be asked a lot of the time to review things in your field, it's exciting to contribute to the, to kind of get an insight into early contributions, and also to help make them help improve the quality, I guess.
Yeah, and I'd say we're always looking for positive criticism as opposed to, fine, there might be something that troubles you about the paper, but give the author and the editors a bit of insight into how you would tackle it. Not gratuitously, as Nicole says, by, oh, you haven't cited my paper. Because bear in mind, we see that on the editorial board. we've got certain people who go, oh no, not your paper again. But think about when you get your review, and think about what was helpful and how can you frame your feedback to help them, because you're also helping us as the editorial board. I find it really frustrating when I get somebody who says, either way, great paper, publish, or major revision, it's problematic because of its methodology, because that's not helping me to help guide the author in either sense. Let's just deal with special editions or special issues. We like them. We try and have one special issue every 18 months in UPR. We also hate them because they're really hard to corral, to try and get all the authors publishing at the same pace and all the reviewers reviewing at the same pace, so that we can get the thing out in a timely fashion. And of course, not all papers get through, so you'll see we have a half special issue. The way the process works by a person, a group of people coming to us with a proposal, saying, oh, we want to do a special issue on this. This is the rationale, this is the sort of content, or here are the authors we're after, or alternatively, we want to advertise and seek authors in this field. The editorial board then review that proposal, and as ever, I think with everything in academia, usually come up with some other useful things that they'd like to see, or to help steer it much more to our scope. And if it gets the thumbs up, if it fits, we often go back and say, well, actually, it's going to be quite a while until this special issue comes out, because we've just had one. We obviously don't want to dominate every edition of the journal with a ring-fence special issue. And then that editorial board for the special issue help us. They help us in terms of they They sort out the papers that they want to see in the special issue. They give them a quick review to make sure they align with the message, the approach of that special issue, and hopefully make reviewers' jobs easier. Then they get submitted and they go through a normal review process, like every other paper, and they're dealt with then by the editorial board, not the special edition editors. But Anthony keeps tabs on things process-wise to keep things moving. So I guess he's the sheepdog. And then we'll come back to the special issue editors, you know, when we need some help. Look, this one's got rejecting a major. Could you sit down? Could you help to get this paper in shape with the author? Finally, when all the papers get through, the special issue editors usually write the editorial that goes with that special edition. I think that's about it. Have I missed anything? No? Okay.
No, but I think they're, you know, to echo your comments, but they're really, you know, they're really good for the journal, but they're also really good for you individually. I mean, I got involved in UPR initially back in 2005 because of a special issue proposal that I put in to the journal on qualitative methods, basically. So, which came out in 2006. So it's, you know, at the time I thought it was an important issue. It was under research, and I think that's what got it over the line with the editorial board at the time. I wasn't on the board then. I was a postdoc when I submitted it here at ECU. And by the time I got through, I was in Adelaide in my first kind of lectureship position. So again, it can be a good strategic move for your career, basically. So it's about hitting the right topic at the right time, basically, and then getting the right people involved in the mix with you, basically. So people that you kind of trust, you know, are going to deliver, and they've got something that's going to be kind of make a contribution in that topic field.
I think I might add, we also have our eye on our, whatever it's called, the ISI of the journal. So it's nice if you've got somebody who's a bit long in the tooth that's going to attract interest to that special issue, as well as ECRs. So you need something to hook it in. We even do think, you know, like if the first edition of the year, we think hard about, have we got somebody who's got a really established track record? Can we get them published in the journal early in the year? Because that relates to the process of ISI and keeping our numbers up. The whole issue of timely reviews and encouraging a paper to get through the system quicker is also good for our ISI. So these are all sorts of other things that we think about, as well as just, you know, from the author's perspective, you know, how do I write? How do I get through the review process? As a journal, we want to keep the journal healthy and happy and encourage people to write. And importantly for this journal, that it's actually read and utilized out there. So and I've forgotten the name again, we've changed practice reviews and debates. It's very much us wanting to engage with, if you like, the industry. And it always fills me with pride to see somebody's printed one of our journal papers and it's sitting on their desk in state government. So that matters. So that's why we've got those two sections of the journal. Okay, I'm going to have to go. Thanks, Rob.
No, that's really, it's a nice positive note to finish on as well. And you know, we're only just 1 minute over, so that was really good. We could talk forever about all of these topics, and hopefully we'll be able to have future events or opportunities to make these connections. But yeah, thank you so much to everybody on the UPR journal board for like this wealth of insight that hopefully is going to be useful for ECRs for who knows, years to come, since it'll be available to watch on YouTube. And yeah, thanks to everybody for attending and magically, transmitting that to the people who have had to leave it too. And also I want to send out thanks to the other ACERN coaches, some of whom are here, like Declan and Linus and Afshin, but also Rachel and Zeng. And a very, very, very special thank you to Riwa, who basically organized most of this, and she's such a hard worker. And thank you, I appreciate that so much. She's done an amazing job. Yeah, so I hope that this has at least helped to demystify, some of the journal process and the publishing process for people. I'm sure that if you have specific questions, you can also contact the journal to help with these sorts of things. Hopefully, it's also about making that link more accessible. As I said before, you can follow ACERN on Twitter and Facebook, and also our YouTube channel. The video will be going up on our YouTube channel afterwards, but that'll keep you hooked into future events and opportunities that we hold. And have I forgotten anything, Riwa? Or to the UPR members?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank my UPR Ed Board people for fronting up and being so open and helpful. And I guess I'd have a plug for UPR. I hope this results in more papers being submitted, because I think one of our frustrations is when we see a great paper and it's published in another journal. So think about UPR. We're nice people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Could I just quickly on I suppose a sister organization, maybe a big sister organization, that is ACRN. So just keep your eyes and ears peeled. It's going to be 2 announcements probably coming out from ACRN about new members to the ACRN committee, and then also a launch of the ACRN's new website as well. So coming soon to an inbox near you.
The Australian Cities Research Network, ACRN.
There we go. I think we've got
Sorry,
those in the chat.
Just use the acronym,
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Paul. And thanks, everyone. And thanks for making this a success, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.